uh, speaking from the My Health series for Ramadan. Inshallah, everyone's Ramadan is going well. Thank you so much for joining me. If you were able to hear lesson one and you're back, I really appreciate it. If you're new, welcome. This is the second part of my four-part series, and today's lesson will be about powerful communication techniques. My name is Brother Stephen Hernandez, and a little bit about myself. I'm a marriage and relationship educator, which means I am not a therapist. I am not, nor do I would ever pretend to be. My training really is focusing on what we're going to talk about today, which is skills and techniques around communications and relationships. So I did that full time for work for a number of years, and I do that now as a consultant or a contractor for a variety of marriage and relationship education organizations throughout the country. If you would, I'd like to learn a little bit more about me and the work that I do, both as a nonprofit consultant and as a marriage and relationship educator. You're welcome to check out my YouTube channel. It's called Stephen Hernandez's Nonprofit Fundamentals, and I have a whole bunch of playlists and information on my YouTube channel. I have a podcast, which is called Stephen Hernandez's Relationship and Nonprofit Fundamentals, and you can find that on Anchor FM, Spotify, or a variety of podcast platforms. So, with that being said, let's get into today's presentation. Our objective today is nothing less than review and practice simple but powerful techniques to improve the communication in all of your relationships. So one of the things I really like about this series is that we're not just going to talk about romantic relationships or relationships even with your friends. We're definitely going to do that today and throughout our series. But the techniques that we're going to cover today will really help all communication across all relationships that you have. So whether that's in the workplace, that's between your siblings, you and your parents, a romantic partner, etc. If you practice these skills, you will definitely improve your communication across all levels. Now, a bit of recap. So for those of you who were not here last week, I'm going to kind of go over some of the things I addressed. For those of you from last week, this is a bit of a recap, but it's always good to reinforce the lessons that we provide. So lesson number one is, recap number one, I should say, is where do our communication styles come from? And if you see from this image right here, I selected this image because the way we communicate is based on our culture, the people we come from, the country of origin that we may come from, the region of the country of origin that we come from, the state in that region of the culture of origin we come from, the village of the country of origin that we come from, the religion we practice or we were brought up with, etc., 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 our family history, all these things, they all form the template of our lives, our personalities. They inform the way that we communicate. So we need to kind of keep that in mind, that every one of us as a unique being is bringing a cultural, a religious, an ethnic, and a personal history to any conversation, verbal or nonverbal, that we have, which is often what gets us into trouble with our communication. It really kind of causes those problems when we're trying to communicate, especially when it matters, which is what we're going to cover today. So before I get really into the weeds, I probably have less slides today than I did last time, probably because I'm going to really focus on a couple of techniques, really go through a number of the skills, and inshallah we'll have a lot of questions like we did last week. So some best practices just to kind of set the table in terms of any communication that you want to have, any conversation you want to have, but especially when it's hard, especially when it's difficult, especially when the conversation might be embarrassing or awkward. Always think of these things. Use open-ended questions. Don't make declarative statements. You did this. I know you did that on purpose. Now, they might have actually done it on purpose, but when you come at someone like that, it tends to provoke a negative or defensive response. Use careful, non-judgmental statements. Let me back up a little bit and preface, like any best practice, I'm saying all this to myself first, and Allah knows I'm often not practicing my own best practices. These are not easy things to do. I really want to emphasize that. It kind of goes against what are the negative habits that we have as speakers, as communicators. But I am telling you that if you practice these things, it will make things better. And again, we have the beautiful example of the Prophet, praise be upon him, who in many ways communicated in this way in times of conflict, in times of stress, in times of real difficulty. He would use careful, non-judgmental statements. He was direct and assertive without being aggressive or abusive. And these are the things we really want to try and practice. Again, rules of the road. Generally, men prefer a focus on direct problematic solving. Women may prefer a focus on the process rather than the outcome. Again, general rules of the road. Be aware and considerate of generational differences. If you're speaking to an elder, even if they're wrong, perhaps especially if they're wrong, try to treat them with the respect that they're owed as an elder in the community. If there's someone who's much younger than you and they're just kind of brought up in a different way, be aware of that as well. Incorporate active listening skills. And I'm really going to get into what that means later on, but practice your active listening skills and be aware and considerate of cultural differences. Some cultures speak closer to, are used to physical touch when they're speaking. Some cultures find that very inappropriate. There's a lot of hand movements in some cultures, like my own. Some people sit very rigidly. Again, all these things are come from our culture, and we must be aware of those things and try not to let our own cultural lens poison or incorrectly filter what we're hearing and seeing, so it derails the conversations that we're trying to have. So, I believe this is going to be our last bit of recap. If you remember from last week, for those who attended last week, what we were trying to do was to help ourselves break bad communication habits. We were trying to avoid being passive aggressive, saying kind of like not so subtle or subtle digs, like, insulting someone, but not being not saying it with our full chest, as the kids say. We were trying to avoid being aggressive with our language or our body, just flying off the handle, using really aggressive or abusive words or actions when we're upset. For those of us who are passive in our communication or in our behavior, we are trying to kind of break that habit, trying to be more assertive. Again, the goal is to be assertive. The goal is to be someone who can communicate directly, clearly, respectfully, without offending someone, without being aggressive, without being overly passive, like that real clear road. And I think we all have met people like that who can just say what's on their mind and not necessarily get people to agree. That's not what we're talking about here. It's just someone who's able to communicate in a way that's very clear and people understand what they mean. The older that I've gotten, it never ceases to amaze and frustrate me when I'm thinking I'm being very clear in my words, my actions, or my writing, and people will misinterpret that. And we're going to get into a lot of examples of my own personal life, things I've seen at work that I think will illustrate these points. So before we get into this a little bit further, there's always things we need to be aware of. When you're communicating with anyone, be aware of your own body language and their own. So, for example, myself, I stand a lot at work. So at the end of the day, I don't want to stand. I don't want to sit anymore. I want to stand. A number of people have told me that when I'm standing over them, just because I physically might be uncomfortable, it's off-putting to them. It feels like I'm looming over them. It feels very aggressive to them. Again, just on my personal level, I have a habit of kind of crossing my arms across my chest just because it's comfortable. I'm always flailing my hands around when I speak. So me doing this is a comfort move for me, but my body language may be very off-putting or seem very aggressive or dismissive to someone else. The tone of our words. So not just what we say, but how we say it, right? I'm sure we all heard that growing up as kids. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it, right? And that will influence how people will hear you. Making eye contact. This is, again, on a personal level, this is something that I struggle with. Some people have told me that that's a cultural thing. that some cultures don't like a lot of eye contact. Others do like a lot on eye contact. I'm trying to make eye contact with the camera right now so you guys can see me doing that. And I feel the strain myself. I feel like, oh man, you're really staring into that. But again, these are the nonverbal things that we need to be aware of when we're communicating. And last and certainly not least, be aware and choose carefully the words that you use, especially when we're upset, especially when we're hurt, we're excited, whatever it may be. We may speak too harshly, too hotly, or too hastily, and we don't choose our words with care, and that can derail the conversation even before it begins. Now, before I move on, I do want to encourage anyone who's in the audience here today, if you have a question, by all means, put it in the chat. I will be checking that periodically, and we will definitely have time for questions below at the end of the session, I should say. But if you need me to clarify something, if there's a point that perhaps I'm not making clearly, or you just have a question, if it's something I can incorporate into the presentation, I will happily address it as I'm speaking. So go ahead, put comments and questions in the chat box there. So moving on. Technique number 1, active listening. A broad overview of this, very important, but much easier said than done technique is as follows. Oh, I should clarify that a lot of what I'm going to be basing my talk on today is from the wonderful organization and curriculum called PrEP. PrEP is one of the kind of like foremost marriage and relationship education seminars, curriculums. The company itself is called PrEP Inc. And a lot of the techniques I'm going to be using comes from that initial training that I took many years ago, which I've used in my own life, in my own marriage, and it's something that I would encourage you all to seek out. So it's called PrEP Inc. I want to give them credit for the information I'm about to share. So active listening. Active listening is as follows. You are listening to understand, not to rebut. So that means when someone says something to you, even if you think it's crazy, even if you know it's wrong, even if you think you are right and this is a waste of time, you don't rebut, you don't interrupt, you don't cut off, you listen. You are really trying to listen to not just what they're saying on top, but underneath. And we're really going to get into that later on. If possible, if you can, after the person's done speaking, you try to rephrase so you show that you understood what they've said. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. Active listening involves slowing the conversation down, taking your time to be careful about what you're saying, how you're saying it, and how you're trying to absorb information. A phrase that you're going to hear me say a lot tonight, and so I wanted to put it here early in the presentation, is knowledge builds intimacy. And when I use the term intimacy here, I don't mean like a sexual intimacy or romantic intimacy. That is definitely part of that definition and is part of that, but I mean this for our purposes tonight in a much more general way. Knowledge builds intimacy in the sense of you know one another. There's a closeness, there's a bond building that happens when you really learn from someone else because you're having a real conversation. You're really getting to learn and build knowledge about another person. Think back, if you've ever had a really deep conversation with someone, when you get to know them more, whether it's your parents, a friend, a coworker, even a boss who has really kind of opened up themselves, that knowledge that you are sharing and imparting builds intimacy. It builds a bond between you. Active listening is fundamental in order for that to happen. If you're cutting someone off, if you're frustrated because they're stuttering and they're nervous or they can't get the words out and you just kind of like bulldoze the conversation or you're steering it in a direction you want to go, that's not active listening. You're not going to build that intimacy because you're not building your knowledge because you're just kind of rushing to the conclusion. So that's definitely something I want you to keep in your mind. Knowledge builds intimacy. The more you know about someone, the more closely you will be bonded to that person. You can't know someone if you don't let them talk. So let's get a little bit more into active listening. This right here is directly from PrEP, as you can see at the bottom. This is from the PrEP Educational Products Incorporated. This is the one of the foremost things. They've boiled down the active listening technique to what is called, what the image you're seeing right here, it's called the speaker listener technique, or the floor. And when you take the lesson, they literally will give you like a little, it's like a cardboard card, which looks like a tile floor, or maybe like a little magnet or something like that. It helps people to have something physically in hand. Now, literally what you're using this for, and again, I need to clarify, this is not for every single conversation, okay? Like, don't misunderstand me here. When you're using active listening, especially at first, it will feel awkward. It will feel weird. It will feel slow. It will feel clunky. You will feel probably pretty silly doing that, which should tell you something, that we as humans are just not used to really listening. We're not really used to taking our time to make eye contact, to slow our words down, to take in a breath, to really listen, right? So, like anything, the first time you rode a bike, the first time you went out for a run, or any kind of technique that you did for the first time, maybe the first 10 times, is going to feel weird up until you really start to practice it and it becomes more natural. So, the speaker listener technique is as follows. If you are the speaker, you speak for yourself. You don't mind read. What that means is you use I statements. I feel it's important to me. This is my opinion. You don't start a conversation with, you did this. I know you always do this on purpose. You certainly don't name call. Again, you're such an idiot. Like, why would you do that? You're not speaking for yourself in that scenario. You're assuming someone did something wrong. You speak for yourself. You keep your statements brief. What's fascinating as humans is that we tend to talk a lot without saying anything, right? Let me say that again. We use a lot of words, but we don't actually make a lot of sense. We don't actually get to a point. So if you're the speaker and you're holding the floor, I mean, you're the speaker, you keep your statements brief. You communicate the bare essentials, and then you move on. And then you stop. You have to give the floor to the next person. Then when it's the listener's turn, they paraphrase what they hear. You focus on the speaker's message, even if it drives you crazy, even if you think they're wrong, you don't rebut. And then the rules for both of you is the speaker has the floor, okay? The speaker is the person who's speaking, you don't interrupt them. The speaker keeps the floor while the listener paraphrases, and then you share the floor, okay? So let me run through that as a brief example. So if you're the speaker, you could say something like, when I got a promotion and I wanted to tell you about that, and you cut me off and you said, I don't have time for this right now. Instead of saying, you always do this, you never listen, you never care about my accomplishments, you never give me the time of day, you just always are, you are always in your own world. That may be true. You may feel that way, but you're not speaking for yourself, not really. If you're speaking for yourself, you would say something like, when I told you about my promotion and you cut me off and you said, I don't have time for this right now, that hurt me, because this was something I really had been working for, and I was so excited to tell you, and you're the person I always want to tell these things to. And I felt really kind of like shut out. I felt hurt when you did that. And then you stop. Okay? Now the onus is on the listener. So the listener, instead of saying, normally what we would say is, that's so stupid. Well, like, of course I'm proud of you. Like, something came up, or I didn't have time for this, right? Again, that's rebutting. You're like, right away, you're trying to push them off. The listener's job in this scenario would be to say something like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is when I kind of shut down that conversation and I didn't make time to speak to you. You were really hurt. And then you stop. Let me kind of buttress that. Even as the listener, even if you disagree with what they said, that's not your job right now is not to argue with them. Your job is to show them that you listened to what they said. When I didn't make time to speak to you, what you're saying is that you felt hurt, right? You're drilling down into the purpose of the conversation. And then the initial speaker will agree or disagree. So they're like, okay, yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, I felt hurt by that. And then you stop. And then you can start to have the conversation and you can take it further. Why I start with this technique is because active listening is so hard to do, but you can see how quickly something can get derailed. If I came at you, you never care about my accomplishments. You're just always in your own world. You never care about what I do. The person could just get up and leave. They could start like an explosive argument, and then you don't actually get anywhere. That's why active listening is so powerful. Because whether that's you're speaking to a promotion about to your friend, to your brother, to your wife, to your spouse, any one of those relationships could benefit in this example from someone being able to have the strength to say, I felt hurt when you did that. I really wish you would have kind of shared that with me because it was important to me. And then if the listener is like, okay, so then they're not apologizing at this point. What they're saying, all they're doing is trying to paraphrase what the speaker says. So what I'm hearing you say, and I know how weird that sounds, but you have to get used to it. So what I'm hearing you say is when I didn't listen to you or when I kind of cut you off, you felt hurt. You felt like I didn't listen to you, right? You can kind of maybe interpret a little bit, but don't go too far with that. Now, moving on. Technique 2. Get to the point. Our goal is to be assertive, but not rude. Say what needs to be said. I love this little picture right here. You can see some of you may have played the old game of the coffee cans or the bean cans with the string. You had like a little phone. And it would kind of garble the communication. That's often what happens when we pile around a lot of junk, a lot of defensiveness, a lot of stuff around what we're trying to say, and we don't actually get to the point. So let me tell you a story. This is from a couple that I worked with a number of years ago. They were a newlywed couple, and they came to see me when I did marriage and relationship work full time because they were having communication problems, which was what people always say. And so the couple was, as I said, it was a relatively young couple. The husband was older. He was a very successful businessman, so he was quite well off. And the wife was younger than him, but not too much. But she, at the time of their marriage, she came from a different socioeconomic class than he did. So he, like I said, he was a businessman or a busy professional. I can't remember what it was. But he definitely was making money, And this is important to the story. So I think about a month into their marriage, the husband came home. And the wife had gone shopping that day, had gone to the grocery store, and she was like putting stuff in the refrigerator. And as people often do, she was like, "Oh, hey, look!" She was showing off the things she got on sale, and she showed him that she had gotten like a big tub of margarine. It's not butter; it was margarine. And her husband like froze up. She said, "She's like she got this look on his face." Kind of tensed up, and he's like, get that out of the house right now. I don't want that here. And she's like, what? Like, I saved a couple bucks on this. What's the problem? And he got increasingly angry. He was getting really upset. I don't want that in the house. Please get rid of it. And like right away, she started to get defensive. I was like, what's wrong? Like, I thought you would be happy, right? I saved money on this. I clipped a coupon. What are you being so weird about? Like, who cares? It's butter. It wasn't even butter. It's margarine. And he got more and more mad. And they're starting to have this argument now about butter, and he's not listening to her. She's not listening to him. Gets to the point where he grabs the butter and throws it in the trash can. And then they weren't talking because, he flipped out. And she just couldn't understand what was the deal about this butter. Why was he so mad about this, about such a simple thing? He was not getting to the point. They had gotten married after a pretty short engagement. And when you scratch the surface, she didn't really know that much about him because he had told her that he had grown up very, very poor. He grew up so poor that a staple of his house growing up was margarine sandwiches. So his mother would get the cheapest butter or margarine she could find, and she would load up the cheapest bread she could find, and that would be their dinner. And he grew to hate, to loathe the taste of that margarine and everything it represented. That he was poor. His mother, who was a single mother, couldn't afford better food. And he couldn't complain because he knew that was the best his mother could give him. And he swore that he would, what? He would make something of himself. He would get educated. He would make money. He would take care of his mother. And he would never, ever, ever have to eat that cheap margarine again. That is what that tub of like $3 margarine represented to him. Everything that he had fought against, everything that he had escaped, and he was right here back in his house and with his newlywed wife. But he just freaked out. He got so upset. His mind is like locked down. He wasn't able to tell her. He had never told her how poor he was. He kind of alluded to it. And he said, "Oh yeah, like I had, I'm a single mom. We kind of had it rough some days." But he didn't tell her how desperate things had been. He didn't tell her how poor they were, how hungry he was at times. That's something she never knew about him. What did I say earlier? Knowledge builds intimacy, right? She didn't know this about her husband. And the reaction that we're always going for is, oh. So when he told her, "I'm sorry that I freaked out. I'm sorry I blew up. That was wrong." Just what I wanted to tell you, what I should have told you, is that margarine is something that I had a lot as a kid. And that's all we had for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I hated it. Like I freak out when I see the sight of that. It disgusts me. And I never, ever, 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 I will never allow myself or my wife to be that poor again. That is what the butter represented. But he didn't tell her that. She didn't know. Knowledge builds intimacy. The more she knew so much more about him, that's why he was so driven in his career, why he was always outside of the house. He was working so much. He was consumed with the idea of making more money so he would never feel that poor again. Knowledge builds intimacy. It's not about the butter. It never was. It was a symbol for something that he was trying to escape. That's not an easy conversation to have. It's much easier to say, "I don't want the stupid butter," and throw it away, right? That's the easy route that we can take. Knowledge builds intimacy. When you can go on a limb and you can be brave and talk about the things that are close to your heart, that's really what's going to improve your communications. Get to the point, as hard as it may be. Technique number 3, choose your words with care. So I'm recycling some of my images right here because this is very important. So this is a personal example. A number of years ago, I was co-executive director of an organization, and we had an intern. She was great. We eventually hired her. She was a wonderful employee. Her mother was an executive director of a different, somewhat related organization in the area that we worked in. And I had met her mother. She was so awesome. She was really, really cool. And we were like wrapping up for a program or something out at the end of the day. And I mentioned to her, like, she was just talking about her mother and how much she admired her. And I said, "That is a woman I could follow. She's awesome." Something like that. That's a woman I could follow. In my mind, I was just trying to be really precise with my language because she was a woman, and that is someone I definitely could follow. Like, she really was a very impressive leader. And that is that for whatever reason, that was the word that I chose. And so I'm saying, like, that's a man I could follow, or that's a leader I could follow. I chose the word that is a woman I could follow, which is literally true. She is a woman, and I definitely could have benefited from her management. Her daughter, though, heard that differently. She really, like, she didn't tell me at first because I could tell she was upset with me, but she wasn't telling me for a little while. which is awkward when it's in the workplace and you have heat with your employees. But she felt I had diminished her mother by making a point of addressing her gender. Because I could tell she was upset, and then we had a conversation about it. And she told me that in her mind, again, intent versus impact, right? Like, my intention was to honor her and point out the fact that she was a woman, because I thought, like, it was rare in the area we were in, which was a very conservative area. There was a female executive director. My intention was good. The impact I had was the opposite. My employee felt I was denigrating her mother by pointing out her gender, which of course was not my intent. And we had to have a conversation about that. We smoothed things out. But she was really upset for a while because the impact my words had did not match the intention that I had. So be aware of the words that you use. And again, right here, I have examples of like gender terms, but it can be all kinds of different things. Like we are so loose with how we speak sometimes. Like, don't be a chicken. Like, don't be a wimp. Like don't be dumb. Right? Choose your words with care. Be careful with how you speak. Don't be an idiot. Like, that's so stupid. Why would you do that? Even we get careless with the words that we use. Again, Islamically, like the Rasul was always so careful with his words, and will always encourage people to not be hasty in their language. So inshallah, especially during the time of Ramadan, we really should try to be careful with the way that we speak. Technique number 4, which I forgot to label this number 4, my apologies, is XYZ statements. So now we've addressed active listening will help us listen. We need to be aware of the things that we should be careful of. Now, this really powerful technique is surprisingly and deceptively easy. And again, at first it will feel awkward, it will feel scripted, but that's the point, right? Like, when you're learning how to dance, you learn the steps, then you learn to the music. If you're learning how to ride a bike or to build something, you follow the instructions, and then you get comfortable with it. XYZ statements. This will help you dig deeper, but it does not need to be overlong. Again, it's better to be succinct when we're trying to say something important. And we use XYZ statements when it's something that's important. We're really trying to get something across. And it's not just for negative things. Very, very simply, an XYZ is something you can use with a friend, at work, especially at work, because it's, especially now, because most of us are working remotely. It's easy to misinterpret something that you hear on a Zoom meeting, or maybe an email, or like a text that you get. And so it helps you to be more precise. In short, the XYZ statement is, when you did X and made me feel Y. And this is similar to the technique 1, but we take it a bit deeper. We take it way deeper if we can. When you did X and made me feel Y, and then the cap to this is, you have to make the statement something along the lines of, and this is important to me because, and that's the Z. Okay? Let me give you an example. Again, this is not just for negative things. It can be positive. So I often like to use this with couples, because it really helps them say deep things. When you made me a lunch, when you packed me a lunch, even though I knew you had worked all day, it made me feel cared for and special, because you know how forgetful I am and how nervous I am when I'm going to go on a job interview. And this is important to me because it's important to me to feel supported, and that you are thinking about me. And that's why I felt so good when you did that. It's important to me to know that you're thinking about me. X. When you did X, they made you a sandwich. It made me feel happy, cared for. And this is important to me. And you could go even deeper, right? When you made me a lunch, when you packed me a lunch, it made me feel cared for. And this is important to me because I never had that growing up. Or I was the oldest child, and I always had to take care of other people. And I'm not used to having people take care of me. This is important to me because I need to feel cared for sometimes. X, Y, Z. You can use it when you're expressing something negative too. Not negative, like you're not trying to neg someone, but you're trying to address something that's hurtful. When you broke your promise and you said that you were going to come to my gallery opening, it made me feel betrayed or insulted. This is important to me because I need to know that I can rely on you. When you say you're going to do something, I need to know that you're a trustworthy person. When you did X, when you broke your promise, it made me feel hurt. It made me question you as a person, because it's important to me to know that you're trustworthy, that when you say something that you're going to do it. Do you see how much deeper you can go with an XYZ statement? You can use this at work or in school. When you said you were going to finish the group project and you told me it was going to be done yesterday and it's Friday and you haven't even started yet, it makes me feel anxious because this grade is really important to me. And I need to know, Z, this is important to me because I need to wrap up this class. I need to get a passing grade because I intend to graduate this year because I can't work any more hours to pay for this. This is important to me. I have to get out of this class. I have to pass. And I have to know you have my back on this, right? Then when you combine this with active listening, you can really get deeper, right? Then the listener can be like, okay, so when I didn't show up to the gallery opening, even though they had a perfectly good reason in their mind, right? They're not saying that right now. When I didn't show up to your gallery opening, when I didn't do the group project, you felt betrayed or maybe tricked, or you started to question me as a person. That's a heavy thing to hear as a listener. That's a tough thing to hear, that you are your value as a person, your status as a person, your honor as a person is being questioned. That's not easy to hear. So you have to put your active listening hat on and, kick it back to them. Like, is this what you're trying to say to me? And then they can respond. Like, yes, it's really important to me that you show up when you say that you are going to. And then this is where knowledge builds intimacy. When you start that kind of conversation, the guards come down. That's when people will say things like, "You maybe you don't know this, but my dad would always make big promises, and he would say, we're going to go out on the weekend, we're going to have fun," and he would never show up, or he would forget, or he would get busy with work, or I always felt like I had to be in charge in the house. And so when someone says they're going to care for me, or I'm going to have time off, or I'm going to be able to relax, that's valuable to me. And if you don't do that, then I question your genuineness. I question your honesty with me, right? They start to share things about themselves. This is important to me because I experienced abuse or abandonment growing up, and I need to know that I can rely on you. Can you do that for me? Right? And then you can calibrate. Knowledge builds intimacy. The more you know about each other, the better you understand the fault lines, the tricks, the foibles, the things that are going to be upsetting and hurtful to them. And you can really start to build on that and deepen your relationship. So I threw a lot at you. Active listening, XYZ statements, being concise, a lot of stuff to think about. I'm hoping we'll have some further questions to discuss. But I want to really end with one more example that I think kind of ties all this in together. Again, this is sort of work example. So again, when I say relationships, I don't just mean personal, interpersonal, romantic relationships. So I was in a toxic work environment, which I'm sure a lot of you guys can perhaps relate to. And my co-director was someone who was very uncomfortable dealing with the human resources part of the job. And so whenever something difficult, a difficult conversation would come up, it was always tossed on my plate because she was just so uncomfortable with it. She would like get so anxious. She would start to cry. Just if there's any kind of tension or conflict, she would really get upset. So we had this wonderful staff person who was completely dedicated to this program that was in a local prison. So it was a really awesome, very successful program. She was all about it. She kind of dedicated her whole life to it. But it was a federally grant-funded program, and our federal grant overseers were like, yeah, that's great, and you're doing some amazing work there, but you have like 10 times the numbers that we need in this particular area, and you have like none in the community. The person that's in the prison, they need to scale that back by like 2/3, and we need them in the community. Not an easy thing to communicate. My co-executive director, who was probably about 25 years older than me at the time, was like, I can't have this conversation with her. Kelly was the staff person's name. I can't have this conversation with Kelly. She's going to freak out. It's going to get awkward. I'm just going to get so upset. I won't be able to have this conversation. You do it. That was literally how it was presented to me. And so I had to call Kelly in and talk to her about this. Hey, like we know you love the program, but you're going to have to cut. You have to drop from like 6 classes every month to like 2, maybe not even 2. You might just have to have 1, and you need to be in the community a lot more. And I didn't say it like that, but I'm just kind of summarizing what I had to communicate to her. And she got very, very upset. She got angry, and she started to rail against myself, my coworker, who probably burst into tears. And then the unfairness of the situation, and well, I'll just leave. I'll write a letter. You guys are so wrong. And I remember physically I almost had a sense of like stepping outside of my body, because I went in there understanding any kind of blow up I'm going to get, any kind of anger that's going to come towards me, it's not really at me. This was not my call. Like that's if I could have allowed her to do that, if I had the budget to do that, I would have loved her to love. She loved that program. It was super impactful. But the man said we have to redirect the funds. I was the messenger. In that scenario, I was getting killed. Like I had to kind of sit there and take it, right? I had to be aware of my tone and my body language, because I was doing this just because that's comfortable to her. And as soon as she saw me, she's like, "Oh, what's wrong? Like you look very aggressive right now. Am I going to hear bad news?" So it started off on the bad note. But her upsetness was really not directed at me. And I had to let her kind of get that out of her system in order for us to have a real conversation. Because then it got into things like she really had built a rapport with with the inmates. She was worried about them. I personally feel that she was too wrapped up in the program. She started to, her life had become her job. And she was very nervous about going to the community, because that was a much less structured environment than what she was used to. She carved a very small niche for herself, and she became an expert in that niche, and she was uncomfortable going outside of that. That is what active listening brought to me. Because I didn't get mad at her. I didn't say, well, you have to do this or you're fired. I could have. That was what was in my power at that time. But wow, I told her, because she threatened, like, I'll just quit. Like, you can't do this. I'll just quit. And I told her, I'm like, Kelly, if you quit, like, I will take that as a personal failure, like on my part. That's not what I want to do. But it wasn't until we were able to have an honest conversation, and she admitted that she was nervous about working outside of the prison. She was uncomfortable working outside of a really strict and structured environment. And that was a big part of why she got upset, is that represented change to her. And nobody likes change, especially her, because she had a very rigid job role there that she really excelled in. She got kudos for that. She was getting cheers for all the numbers that she did right there, up until our overseers didn't want that anymore. And she was afraid that if she goes into the community, her reports back would be negative. And a lot of people didn't turn out. The event didn't go well. We didn't get the numbers that we wanted. She was afraid of the change that my news imparted to her. That's why she got so upset. But she was so used to being like the star staff person, she was uncomfortable being candid about her nervousness about changing our service role. But it wasn't until I stepped outside of myself, allowed her anger to wash over me, for us to have an honest conversation as an employer to a staff person, a manager, to a coworker, that we were able to get to that issue. XYZ statements, active listening. If you practice these in your personal life, in your work life, it will make things easier for you, and you will build that intimacy and build that bond between your siblings, your parents, your coworkers, and anyone else you communicate with, you want to have a good conversation with. So I hope that that was helpful, that these are techniques that you can start to practice. Spoiler alert, please don't go home and start saying things like, we're going to practice the floor right now, or I'm going to do my active listening techniques. First of all, you will sound like a dork. Don't do that. And you need just to kind of incorporate them organically in the conversations that you have. So just do your best to try and weave these into your conversations. I hope that we have comments or questions on what we talked about. If there's any point I need to clarify on, I'm happy to do that. Next week's session, as a little bit of a teaser, will be issues in communication between today's couples and families. And boy, are there a lot. So next week's will really be kind of surfacing new things, new communication issues, and how maybe we can address some of them. So I hope today's techniques were of use to you. And if there's questions or comments from the audience, I would be happy to take them now. Now, especially for those of you who are maybe first generation like I am, if you have parents who are reluctant to share anything about their lives, and I think you all know what I mean by that, try these kinds of things. Like, instead of asking your parents, like, what did you want to do as a child? Like, did you have dreams for yourself? That's a heavy question to answer. So maybe ask open-ended questions. Like, what were the things that you like to do? Like, what books did you like to read? Those kinds of things will spark a conversation where someone would be like, I love to read books about, like the Wild West. When I was a child in Yemen, and I always wanted to be like a cowboy, but we didn't have the money for a horse or something like that. You never know. Like, if you just ask open-ended questions, you never know what may come out of that. So I always encourage people to do that, to try and just listen. I know how hard that is, but I really do encourage you to try. Got a quieter crowd today. I thought we'd have more questions. Something I think that will, especially for those of you who are maybe in the marriage process. So perhaps you're having you're speaking with someone now, or maybe you're early in the engagement process. The XYZ statements will be very helpful to you, especially again, even if it's the lovey-dovey phase, or you're having an argument. That's definitely something to use, right? And be very clear about things. Again, if you're early in a relationship and you don't really know each other very well, use those XYZ statements. When someone does something and it really, really makes you happy, let them know that. But the icing on the cake, the gravy and the biscuit is, this is important to me because, okay? Because it's often not important to them. Right? Someone could be like, I was at the store and I saw, and I saw this book from this author that you love. Here you go. That literally could have been, they were at the counter, they saw a bargain book bin, and they picked up something. That could have been the extent of their thought process. But for you, impact versus intention, right? The impact on you was like, wow, I love this. You remembered the kinds of books that I love. You remembered the author that I like because we had that conversation and we talked about our favorite books. You did remember that. Knowledge builds intimacy. The more you know about one another, that will help you share those things. When you bought me that book, it made me feel really loved. But more than that, it showed me that you listen to me. And this is important to me because I want my spouse, I want my wife to know me better than anyone else. I want them to know what I like and what I don't like. And so even though it's a simple thing, you buying that book is important to me because it showed me that you listen to what I like. X, Y, Z. When you did X, it made me feel Y, and this is important to me because. The this is important to me because is the most important part. But I really stress that whenever you say something, when it's important, you have to add the because, especially if it's hard, especially if it's embarrassing. That is where you're going to build that intimacy between you and your partner, your coworker, your siblings, your parents. So, especially as Ramadan is happening, and this is something I always like to encourage people to do. If they're in the marriage talking stage, make sure you spend time with them during Ramadan. When you are, when you're fasting and you're tired and you're hungry or you're hangry, that's a great time to observe someone because they're at their lowest physical ebb. See how they communicate that. So thank you all, as always, for attending. Inshallah, this was helpful to you. If it was, please share this with everyone else. As always, I thank the hosts for helping me out here today and having me as a speaker. Inshallah, this was of use. And we're going to conclude the session today. Inshallah, I'll see you all back next week. Thank you.